Tony, what's going on, brother?
Hey, Mike, what's going on? It's been a while.
It has, man. I'm always reflecting on, like in the midst of 2020, 2021. I'm grateful to be able to meet men who saw what I saw in the midst of all the crazy shit. I think, looking back, I'm grateful to meet with like-minded men who just reject a lot of the bullshit, and I'm grateful that you're one of the voices in the arena calling out some of it.
Trying to, right? Just like the rest of us.
Yeah, so maybe to start, we've run one podcast before. If you can just kind of touch on, what you do, what your message is, a little bit about your story.
Yeah, so my name is Tony Davis. You see it on the screen. I'm a professional wrestler. I'm a nutrition coach. I focus a lot on mental health, on psychology. It was like a weird passion of mine. But I focus more on mental health specifically because I have a history of battling with depression and bipolar myself. And so that led me down an interesting path over the last few years. I know the world's been upside down the past 5 years, but I've been actively working on this since about maybe 6 years ago, 6, 7 years ago. And what I've been working on and trying to figure out is how to use diet, how to use exercise to help manage my bipolar, help manage the depression. Because even though I was offered medication when I was first diagnosed in 2018, I knew right away that I didn't want to go that route. And so it sent me down the path of trying to figure it out on my own.
Which route was that? You didn't want to go down which route?
Using medication and using pills and all that for bipolar for depression. It was an option at the time. Um, but since it wasn't, when I was diagnosed with bipolar in 2018, since it wasn't that severe, um, I had the option to not for a while.
Yeah, that always stands out to me because I've been diagnosed. I mean, live long enough and try not to have depression or anxiety at some point in your life. And it's like, how do you meet said depression? How do you meet said anxiety? And I think a lot of the solutions are here's this pill, and I'm sure you'd agree. It's not a knock on anybody who's doing it, but to me, the men in the arena are, well, how do we meet that pain? It's a common question I ask in my life, right? Like, how do I deal with these thoughts or whatever the anxiety, whatever it is? And um, maybe if you can dive into that a little bit more, because when I met with doctors in periods of my life, oftentimes it was here's a pill, right? And I'm so grateful that I decided not to. Now, again, it doesn't make me better than someone who is on those pills, but I think I think it's a positive for people to get off pills if they can, and those who facilitate that. So maybe if you can just dive into that, like and speak on the pain, man, because I think that's something that unites us, and ultimately to move past it. Uh, if you could speak on that, because it's like every time there's pain in our life, it's like how do we get rid of it and to go through it. Those are the stories I love to hear about, and I'm sure you can speak somewhat on that.
Yeah, and really, I remember in 2018, there's this day that I always point to, which is like the pivotal day for me that kind of really set everything off, right? And there was a there was a time when I was in wrestling school and living in Orlando, 2016 to 2017 to 2018, where when I first got to the school, I was super excited because it was wrestling school. I was going to become a better wrestler. I was in this great environment, and it was going to be tough. And it was just straight out the box from day one. And eventually, just over the time that I spent there, maybe about 6 or 7 months in, I started getting to this place where I stopped being happy with my life, except for the moments that I was spending in the gym. So when we were doing wrestling drills or in the ring. So when we were doing drills, when we were running matches, I felt great. The literal instant my feet hit the ground outside of the ring, for lack of a better term, I just didn't want to be alive anymore at all. And I eventually got to a point where I didn't even want to go to the school anymore. I was in the morning, I would get ready for school and I would just start getting nauseous. And after realizing that I was just getting nauseous and nauseous every day, I called the school and I said I wasn't going to be in for one day. And
By the time I hung up the phone, the nausea was gone. And I thought that was super weird. And then the next day, started getting ready for school, nausea again. So I called in, said I wasn't going to go, nausea gone. So I decided to take a week off. And that whole week, there was no nausea. There was nothing wrong at all. Week is over. I start getting ready for school again. Nausea comes back. So I'm like, all right, I think I need a break from the school, maybe a break from wrestling altogether. So I call and I say I'm taking a little bit of a break. They say, okay, cool, that's over. Nausea's gone. A couple of days after that conversation, I remember waking up. And at the time, I was living in a two-story. I was living on the second floor of an apartment building in Kissimmee, Florida. And I remember waking up, looking over at the window, and thinking about how fast I would have to run to break through the window, and then how I would have to make sure that I landed on the parking lot to make sure I didn't survive. It was only two stories. So I'm like, if you land the wrong way, you should still survive. And when I had that thought, I was like, all right, I think I need to go look outside and get some help. So uh, I reached out, found a therapist. We worked together for a while because we were working on depression, just stuff around that, because that's what it seemed like it was. And something that the therapist eventually noticed that I never noticed because I'm always the one sitting in it. So when we sit in it, we don't necessarily always have the best viewpoint of what's going on around us. And what she noticed was there were these brief periods where I felt super hyper. I wasn't depressed. I felt like I could take on the world. I felt like I was on top of the world. And they would kind of be interspersed. So it'd be like periods of depression, periods of sort of just like things are okay, nothing's wrong, nothing's good. And then periods where I was just through the roof rude life. And so she brought in a psychiatrist, and the three of us talked together. We worked together for a little bit more, and we realized that it wasn't just depression we were working with. We were actually dealing with bipolar type 2 specifically. And the psychiatrist brought up the option for meds, but we kept talking for a while and came to the conclusion that uh, because it wasn't that severe yet, I didn't necessarily need to be on them. But usually for most people, it's just a matter of time, right? Like if you're not,
When you say "yet," that meaning that if it continued, it can get worse or better?
yes, most in her experience, most people that even if they were in a milder version, a milder form of bipolar where they didn't need medication, it eventually just progressed to the point where you just needed it anyway. So if you told me that and presented that as just something to consider, like maybe just hop on meds now just so you don't get to that point. But I didn't need them at that particular moment because nothing seemed particularly immediately life threatening to myself or anybody around me. And so I was like, okay, I kind of want to try to deal with this on my own. And by on my own, I just mean without meds, not like solo.
Yeah.
Um, and at the time, I was very deep in the fitness bubble. So diet, exercise, all that stuff. And I started learning all these things in the couple years that followed about how the way we eat and the way we exercise can affect our neurotransmitters. And I'm a huge nerd, so I go and I learn all these different tangents, right? And so because I first thought I was dealing with depression before getting diagnosed with bipolar, I was like, all right, well, it seems like depression is obviously at least like one side of bipolar, right? Because it's basically the depressive on one side and then correct, right? And so as I started learning about neurotransmitters, I then go to bipolar and I break that down on the same in the same vein. And I'm like, all right, well, if a part of bipolar is like depression, how does depression present via neurotransmitters? Like what happens with the neurotransmitters that connect to depression? And we always hear about serotonin imbalances and chemical imbalances in the brain, right? And I was like, okay, cool, that makes sense. And the common thought is that depression is caused by the chemical imbalance. That's like what all the older depression commercials used to say, right? And I was sitting one day and I was looking at everything. And I was like, what if we had that backwards? What if the chemical imbalance is what causes the depression? instead of the depression coming first. Like it's a very chicken and egg thing, right? Like which is first? And
Yeah.
I don't claim to know. I just these are just things that I think about and things that I experiment with. And so I broke that down and I kind of had that as like an open tab in a browser, if you will, right? Like depression connects to serotonin and that. And that was a tab that was just open for years, just as I thought about it. And so I broke down the other side of bipolar, which is the high side. And if you look at it by itself, it kind of presents like uh, anxiety, maybe a little bit of ADHD. If it's super manic, it can be like psychosis, and there's all that. And so I took the same approach where I was like, well, how does that look in the brain when we look at neurotransmitters? Not manic side, but just those individual conditions, right? And usually the anxieties from just hyper firing of the brain. So just everything's going super, super high firing rate sort of thing. So I was like, all right, cool. That sounds like high production of dopamine, high production of adrenaline going on. So that's another tab. To have this tab for depression, have this tab for anxiety, and now I'm learning about food and how foods can influence different levels of depression and different levels of dopamine, of adrenaline, of serotonin, a couple other neurotransmitters. And so I started putting puzzle pieces side by side, right? Saying so as an example, like I know that there's two main amino acids in protein that can influence dopamine production and can influence serotonin production. So if I go back to the tab that shows that depression is connected to low serotonin, and I see this other piece of information that says increasing protein can improve dopamine production, would it then make sense that maybe increasing protein could help with depression? And it's funny because I was having these thoughts back in like 2019, 2020, and now there's small pieces of research coming out saying that like actually there's something there. And so I started playing around and learning how to use diet the same way that psychiatrists try to use medication for bipolar, which is like you'll usually have a medication that you would take when you're in the depressive state, and you might have one that you would take when you're in the manic state. Maybe you have one that just kind of keeps you mood balanced, some form of lithium to just kind of keep you in the middle as much as possible. And I started learning how to do the same thing, but instead of using pharmaceutical medications, it's using nutrition and using exercise. And over the years, it's I mean, it's been a hard path, obviously, because it's fairly new territory comparatively. Because usually, right, it's like, oh, you have these mental problems, like you said. Here's the pill, here's the orange bottle. Pop this once a day, or pop this whenever you feel that way, and you're good to go. And so there's a lot of failures, um, but a lot of successes too. Granted, the failures outnumber the successes as they usually do. But I've got a ton of experience and I've got a ton of information that is that's proven super useful for myself and also one of my current coaching clients who also has bipolar, who has noticed that since working with me over the past year and a half, he doesn't even need to take his bipolar medication at all anymore. He's gotten himself off. I didn't tell him to. I didn't even know he was necessarily dealing with bipolar at first because he was on medication. But he came up to me one day after I started talking more publicly about my struggles with bipolar. And he's like, dude, I've been dealing with that too. And so I was asking him about his history with medication. And he's like, yeah, I've got these. But over the past, 5 months or so, I haven't even needed them because I've just been doing what you've been saying in the program. And it's keeping me level better than the medication ever did.
Yeah, and that's why I asked that question too. It's like, it does it progress? Because I ideally want to. I always love providing a way out of, just fixing, because it's a symptom, right? Like I love Henry David Thoreau. It's like for a thousand men hacking at the branches of evil, there's but one striking at the root. And I think it's cool how you use that term of like having these different pieces in the browser. Like medication is one of them, right? And it's like not to shun medication, but at the same
Yeah.
time, this overwhelming like that's oftentimes the only browser that's open. And for you to look
Mhm.
in, essentially what the browsers you're looking in is mind and body, right? And that mind body connection. And then also, and I want to dive into maybe if you can give kind of a snapshot of like some advice that you would give to people, like where to start, like a basic diet plan or a workout plan for someone who maybe never started. And then also, I'm curious, like your spiritual path, like what you believe with that and how that ties into it. Because I'm a big advocate, and I'm sure you're on the same page, mind, body, and spirit. And I
Mhm.
partially look at spirit as how we frame the world, right? It's the lens we look at the world. For me, it's Christ. Like all my roads have led me to Christ. Like that path is like, how are you able one of the tabs for Christ to me is how do you meet pain? Our ability when you're struggling with those thoughts of depression or anxiety, that running out of the window, how do you recontextualize that you're not bullshitting yourself? It's not kind of this fake positive bullshit, like no, you're worth more. It's like sometimes those blanket statements don't really have value, and if they did, we would it's finding those answers in that time. So the the first question I guess is the where does what is your belief like as far as faith, spirit, and then if you could kind of going back to mind and body, kind of give like a blueprint on where people can start, even if they don't have bipolar, just someone who's maybe struggling with thoughts or whatever, like we all do, with thousands of thoughts a day, where they can start implementing some basic tools.
Yeah, absolutely. So first question was where I sit on a spirit and faith path, and I'm a firm believer in Jesus Christ. So there's that. Not necessarily from a Catholic standpoint. I mostly study the New Testament, and occasionally I'll dip back to the Old. Um, but the way that I use that to frame my life is one of the pillars that it helps me create is this framework where I essentially just try to live as much as possible like Jesus did. Right. So, and that's sum everything up about whatever I read or whatever I don't read. That's how I basically operate. Is there was that cliche about 20 years ago. Wow, I didn't realize it was 20 years ago until just now. The what would Jesus do? I
Yeah.
basically try to do that. Right. So when it comes to how do I interact with a person, or how do I deal with stress, or how do I deal with anger, or how do I deal with anything else, it basically comes down to that. I ask myself a question. I try to look for something in the Bible that connects to a version of what I'm feeling, and I run with that. And usually, as it almost always happens, it just comes down to prayer, right? Just praying to God, praying to Jesus for. And this is where I'm going to go a little off the norm. One of many times, I'm sure that's what's going to
Let's
happen as
go.
we talk, which is people will pray in such a way that they try to ask for something from Jesus, or they ask for something from God. And I think that's kind of an arrogant way to go about it. And this is why I think that we also believe that God has this genius plan in place, right? It's true. Knows what he's doing at every time of the day. So if you're asking for something other than that plan, you're saying you don't agree with that plan, and you're trying to get something different from that. And maybe and the counter side to that too, right, is maybe you asking for the thing is part of his plan too. And I don't know either, like I don't know which way is right or wrong,
It
but
requires
it's two sides
self-awareness.
of the same coin. Correct. So what I pray for is I I pray for things that are already in me, and I just pray for the ability to refocus on them. As an example, I'll pray for peace, or I'll pray for strength to go through something, or I'll just pray for the ability to go through something. Like I won't pray for a result. Like I won't say, Jesus, give me this job, or bring me this money, or let me get this weight up in the gym, or something like that, or something. Give me the strength and the peace of mind to be able to do what I need to in order to accomplish those things. And if I get those, then I can execute on them. And if I don't, that's not part of the plan.
Yeah, I my prayer has met a similar path where it's like, help me to see what you want for me. That's a hard thing. It's
Exactly
like,
that. Exactly that.
I want this job, but help me to see if this is the right thing for me and those around me. And it requires, it requires courage and humility, and I can't tell you how many times I'm bumping into so many paradoxes. I think back to 2020 and 2021, how much divide there was. I often bring it up where it's like, to be to be kind to other people who completely disagree with you, but at the same time, be strong in your convictions of what you believe. You know, your voice matters,
Yeah.
but at the same time, there's billions of voices, right? If you're going to speak something with authority, you better make sure what you're saying is absolutely true. And if not, you know, have that humility, but also again, courage to be like, no, like what I have has there's value behind it. And you know,
Yeah.
reflecting on that.
And I find being able to be in that spot where you are willing to stand in your convictions and express them while also having the humility to be like, you know what? I was wrong when I said that, or that's not, there's something I didn't consider, or something like that. That requires a huge reduction in a person's ego. Because usually when a person can't back down from a thought or they can't back down from a belief and they can't change a belief, it's because it's been attached to their ego. And so to attack that belief is now to attack that person's ego. And when one of the things that I get from a steady prayer practice is that separation between myself and those beliefs, because I realize that those beliefs are just an interpretation of what I see around me. And as such, as my point of view and my perspective and my life path changes and progresses, those things can change as a result as well.
Yeah, the ability, yeah. The awareness behind it is absolutely huge because it's when you and that's the other thing too, to correct other people, really being aware of that's to me the real following Christ. What would Jesus do? It's like take out the essentially the block within yourself before you take out on others. And when you realize how many blocks are within, you know, that's what brings the wisdom of like, you know, to rule others is strength, but to rule yourself is true power kind of conviction, you
Yeah,
know, because when you rule yourself, you are able to correct others not even by doing it, you're just being true to yourself. And there's so many levels within that, because another thing is some people don't even want the truth, and wasting time to speak to someone who doesn't want the truth at this season in their life, they may be open later, is foolish and brings you down, and you're wasting time, you know. Kick off the dust off your feet and move to the next, you know.
yeah, it's exactly that.
Yeah.
That's probably so. Last year was the first time that I read all the way through the New Testament from start to end, and that line right there is one of the things that stood out to me the most. Of just dust your feet off and just move on. If they if you come across somebody that's just not into what they're just not going to buy what you're selling, dust your feet off. Doesn't mean they're right or you're wrong or the other way around. It's just you're just not meant to work together in that moment. So just kindly dust your feet off and just head on to the next town.
Yeah. Don't cast pearls to swine, you know, and
Uh-huh.
recognize the swine within, you know, the ego within, who wants to be right, who wants to claim ownership of being right, versus Christ's path of true surrender. Because when the ego is coming from the path of surrender, it's actually passivity. But true
Hmm.
surrender is the letting go of the need to be right. And the paradox is like, you know, Christ didn't have that need to be right. And here we are thousands of years later, and nobody can forget him, you know, and following that path
Yeah.
of not needing to be right is
Well,
often right.
when you have this need to be right and you're trying to get other people to agree with you, it's at least in part because you don't believe that you're right on your own. That's why you need people around you to validate your beliefs, because you don't believe it on your own. Because if you believed it on your own, what would you do if somebody didn't agree with you? You would dust your feet off and go off to the next town.
Yeah, and that's huge. That's rooted in conviction, and there's just such a power. I mean, I love Gladiator, man. You know, he didn't need the validation from the crowd. He didn't need the validation from other people. He was rooted in conviction. And paradoxically, this is the funny part, is like, because looking at the thing, like I want validation. I want to be liked by people. But why am I liked by people? Am I liked by people just because they like me? Then it's like the flip side. If I give you a cookie, oh wow, he's so nice. He gave me a cookie. Oh, I take the cookie away. Now you're my enemy, and it's not rooted
Yeah.
in a deep foundation. Whereas when you're rooted in that conviction, I want to be liked, but I'm not attached to the need to be liked. I want real, genuine connection with people. And then the validation is true, genuine it's validation because of what I stand for and what I believe, not who I am as like a personality. And that's why I love that
Yeah.
movie because there's so many countless scenes where like you know he's instructed to kill the guy he's fighting and he lets him go to go against the emperor and then the crowd's like, oh, Maximus the Merciful. Everything he does is rooted in conviction versus what he's told to do. you know and
Hmm.
and and that's the paradox of that. You'll attract genuine love from those around you when you're rooted in conviction, um which is
For better or
which
for
is
worse, right? Because conviction can go either way.
yeah. And then yeah, the second part of the question, bring it to ground it a little bit. Where did you start, or where can people start? Building that basic foundation of like diets, and maybe if we can even dive into like there's so much division on like what's the right diet. Are you vegan? Are you do you eat meat? And maybe we can unpack all that because there's so many different ways, so many different diets out there and ways to go.
Yeah, yeah. There's almost as many diets as there are people on Earth, right?
Yeah.
If you spend enough time on the internet looking around. Um, this is cool. I like this. I like this question because I go super simple with it with anybody that asks and anybody that I talk to about it. Because when we look at diets, when we look at things like the keto diet, the carnivore diet, Atkins, right, low carb, low fat, whatever, and people always ask me like, does this diet work? Does that one work? Does the intermittent fasting work? How to do all any of those? And the simple answer is they all work. They all work because they all do the same thing, just different paths. I refer to all these diets like if you walk into a Baskin Robbins, right? You're going in for ice cream, but you got 31 flavors to choose from. If you're trying to lose weight, you're walking into a store, you're just trying to pick which path you want to go. The store that you're walking into is the calorie deficit store, where like everything that you get in there is going to lead to an easier way to a calorie deficit. And that's how keto works because you remove all the foods that have a lot of calories, so it's easier to be in a calorie deficit. You go carnivore, you basically remove a lot of the same foods and then some, but you remove all the high carb, high fat foods, you remove calories, now you're in a calorie deficit. Same thing with Atkins, same thing with low fat, same thing with anything. They all work by getting you into a calorie deficit easier. And so what I then do is I just skip all of those. I skip all the middlemen as it were, and I just go straight to the calorie deficit. And so what I'll what I'll position for people is just track your calories, track your protein, and just make sure you're in a deficit and you'll lose weight. Or if you're trying to gain weight, you work to maintain a calorie surplus and you're good to go. So then the next obvious question is, well, how many calories do I need? Great. I've got easy math to figure that out too. Usually by far, people are trying to lose weight more than they're trying to gain weight. If you just look around, right, more people are overweight and obese than not. And so, what I'll usually do to keep things as easy as possible is I'll take a person's current weight. You can do this one of two ways, and it depends. They both work. What I'll do to start with is I'll just take a person's current weight and just multiply it by 10. So if you are 220 pounds, you multiply that by 10 and you have 2,200. That's your calorie target that you should try to not go over if you're trying to lose weight. And the only other thing that I suggest people focus on when starting out is protein, because when we keep protein in check and we keep calories in check, we know just through countless research at this time that the amount of carbs, the amount of fat doesn't matter. It comes down to just calories and protein. So if you just focus on those two, the rest can fall wherever they may, and you're good to go. So we have calories figured out, right? Calories are just body weight times 10. Protein is also super simple. Protein, I'll usually take a person's goal weight. So if your goal weight is, let's say you're 220 now, you want to get to 180. So all you do is you just take 180 and you just set that in grams per day for your protein target. So your two numbers to focus on day to day is 2,200 for calories, 180 for protein. If you can just meet those every day, you're good to go. Now, the next thing people will ask is food quality, right? Because people try to get really spun up and worried about organic food and processed food, and now we're talking about food dyes and seed oils because RFK made them cool. And so now everybody's hyper aware about all this stuff. And when you're starting out, and for 99.9% of your journey, none of that matters. It doesn't matter. There's the only difference between an organic banana and a regular banana functionally is you're going to spend more money for one than the other. That's really it. Like there's people are afraid of GMOs for whatever reason when we've been genetically selecting food our entire existence on planet Earth. The only difference is now it's being done in the lab where we have more control over what's being done. If you really look at any information, there's nothing that shows there's any increased risk of cancer, heart disease, and whatever else they say. Like I'm a huge nerd. I'm looking for any of these smoking guns that says like, yes, that's the thing to avoid. Because if I can find something like that, I will relay that to my clients and it will help everybody. And I would love to sit here and be like, yep, that's the problem. It's the glucose, it's the insulin, it's the sugar, it's red dye 40 or 40, whatever number it is. I don't see it anywhere. I see it nowhere in any sort of controlled environment where we can test these. What I do see is that people that have these health issues are typically overweight. They're typically obese, but for some reason, nobody wants to talk about that. They just want to pin it on something outside of themselves so that thing can be blamed. So we can blame the fries, we can blame the white bread, we can blame the gummy bears. And it's like it's really not the gummy bears, but it's probably the fact that you just ate 5 pounds of them. That might be part of the issue, and it might be because you're not exercising. That might be another part of the issue. But as I'm sure you're aware of, personal accountability is on the decline fast these days. And when we choose not to exercise personal accountability, we start to blame everything outside of ourselves, which is ironic because usually the answer is it's something that we're doing ourselves.
Yeah, that was
So
another thing I wanted to branch off of. How do you as a child, how do you stay accountable? I just did a podcast with Akira, and one of the things that he says is, really staying with it. I've never seen anyone fail, he says, that essentially just stays with it. That can be applied to so many things, and
it's
um
everything.
yeah, it's everything. And what has helped you stay the path? I mean, there's times in my life where I've fallen off, getting back on, and I've gotten better at just staying disciplined in that. What are some tools that you implement that just keep you on the path? You're going to the gym, let's say 2 months or 3 months, and then it just like I'm not seeing results. How do I reframe that to stay the path?
So I have a few different things that cycle through my head to keep me on the path. One is that window, like that the sight of that window is just like etched in my head. I've gone back to Orlando a couple times since then, just on other business, and I've driven by that window just to like remind myself of how I got to where I am right now. And so the window helps, right? Never wanted to go back to that place again mentally. So there's that. The other thing is having a big enough why for why I go to the gym, why I track my food, why I track protein, why I'm sitting in a coffee shop right now and I have a food scale 4 feet away from me because I came in for a muffin. Because again, I don't believe that there's any inherent bad or good food, but I weighed the muffin this morning before I ate it, and like magic, right? And there's a few reasons for that. There's a few whys. And so I used to think you just needed to have one big why. And for some people, that's useful. But I think a lot of people might benefit more by just having several whys that can be a little smaller, but then they just amount to a big enough reason collectively. So one reason is I don't want to be one of those people that gets to 60 and can't move around on their own, or 70 or 8, whatever age, right? Like I'm trying to live as healthy as possible as long as possible. So there's that. Two, I'm a professional wrestler. I'm on TV fairly frequently these days. And so I selfishly want to look the best in the entire locker room. And so that drives me that pulls me. The window pushes me, and the pro wrestling pulls me.
Like
So
that.
it's a double whammy, right? And the newest addition to my whys is I just turned 40 years old. Last November, I turned 40. And everybody believes that when you turn 40, it's supposed to be downhill. You're supposed to not be able to keep muscle on. You're not supposed to be able to build muscle. And so now, and I think this is probably maybe a little selfish too, similar to the wrestling, but I want to be that example of like, no, that's wrong. Just because you're 40 doesn't mean you can't be in shape.
Yeah,
And
I
so
agree.
it's that collection of reasons that keeps me going.
Yeah, I often think about like, I mean, when you bump into paradoxes, you say selfishly, but like, you know, on one hand, when I reflect when Christ says, like, when the people who are outwardly praying, right? They want to be seen by everyone, like the ego, they'll get the reward in full. But at the same time, there's another verse that says, "Go and let your light be seen among men, so they can see that example," right? And that's something that I reflect on, and I think your word using pull, right? I look at it in the sense that it's like we're driving a car, and the windshield is what's going to pull us, but the rear view in your situation was the window, and we glance at the window every so often. We're not going back to that motherfucker. That guy's in the past, right? We're gonna use
Mhm.
him. We're gonna use him. We're not going to be used by it, and I like that, and I wanted to also touch, and I want to dive into the wrestling as well, because I think that everybody has to find what they genuinely love. And I love the example, like you're being nauseous, right? Like that's your body, that's your to me that's spirit talking. It's like, no, let's go this way, right? Listen, listen to your body,
Mhm.
right? It's like how many times people want to listen to the doctor instead of their body, and listening to the doctor is good, but you're in the vehicle, right? And there's only so many things a doctor can tell you or a coach can tell you, and you have to trust yourself, and how you're feeling viscerally, because you're the center of your full experience and you are the ultimate expert within. That being said, it's good to listen to other people who dive into these things as well.
Mhm.
Iron sharpens iron. um, but to finish up this, if so, we lock down diet,
Mhm.
multiplying by 10, and protein intake, your weight,
Just
and
equal to
from
your
there,
goal weight. Yep.
I love it. It's simple, to the point, and everybody can gain value from that. And then as far as working out, maybe if you can just draw out a basic, I don't know how you do, obviously you need a workout plan, but where can people start? Maybe would it be push-ups or whatever? And then maybe for people who are on the path, like a few tips on, what people can do in the gym who are in the arena, and that you've learned.
Yeah. So this is another exciting topic for me because again, I'm a super nerd, so I'm learning stuff and I'm digging deep into these other areas right now. So I'm digging super deep into muscle physiology and what actually drives muscle growth, what drives hypertrophy, which is what that's called. And I'm learning just like the same way I've massively simplified nutrition that I'm starting to simplify workouts too for the in the same vein. And so when I look at what it takes to build muscle, and let's put a pin in that because there's a very specific reason that I always focus on building muscle, and I want to come back to that and talk about that too. But I don't want to veer off topic because I do that way too easily, and then I forget the question. Um, but when we want to make a basic workout, what I like doing these days is basic full body workout because everybody wants to do these bro splits where you have a chest day, you have a back day, you have an arm day, and a leg day, and an ab day, and so you end up going to the gym 5, 6, 7 days a week. I mean, there's a few things wrong with that. One, by doing so much work all the time, you end up creating all this extra wear and tear on your joints, and people end up with like elbow pain, and knee pain, and hip pain, and everything from just essentially doing way too much. Two, you're always tired. You're always wiped out, right? You know the people that they have their killer leg day and then they can't walk for 4 or 5 days. It doesn't have to be that way. So this is why I've landed on the full body approach. One, you only need to go if you structure it well. You only need to do this 2 or 3 times a week. So that right off the bat removes a significant amount of obstacles that a lot of people have just around time and being able to go to the gym, which is a very real roadblock for some people. Not everybody has time to go every single day of the week, right? Some people maybe can carve out 2, maybe 3 hours a week. And so this is going to be the approach for you. When you go to the gym for these full body workouts, you basically, the way I do it is I pick one exercise for a body part, for a muscle group. So I'll usually do something for the chest, right? Some sort of pushing movement. I'll do something for the back, some sort of pulling movement, either a pull down or a row. I'll do something for legs. I'll break up into a couple of different exercises because there are a few different things the legs do. So there's hip-based leg movements, so stuff like hip thrusts, glute bridges, maybe deadlifts, and then there's uh, knee-based leg movements, so stuff like squats, leg extensions, things like that to work the front part of the thighs. So that right there, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, right? Chest, back, hips, knees. That's four parts right there. You can, if you want to, you can break it apart and do a fifth for shoulders. And if you still want to, you can do something for triceps and something for biceps. So you're right there. You're at the seven main body parts, and you can play around with that a little bit if you structure out your entire week. So seven exercises on average. I'll do 1 to 2 sets of each exercise by keeping the intensity very high. And the way that I keep intensity high is by going heavy weight with a low number of reps. And by low, I mean usually about 4 to 8 reps per set. The big kicker here, this is what makes the whole thing work, is within that rep range, within that 4 to 8 rep range, you need to get very close to failure. You don't have to go all the way to failure, but you have to get on average 1 or 2 reps away. And that essentially looks like getting to that point where the weight is going not super slow. I used to say super slow, but I've updated because it's not quite what that would put in people's heads. But it's getting to the point where the weight is slow. You're trying to move it fast. And no matter how much you're trying to move it fast, it's still moving a lot slower than you would like it to be. When you get to that point where you start having those thoughts of, I don't know if I can do another rep, that's about where you want to start thinking about stopping. A lot of people, they'll have that thought and they still have like 3, 4 reps left to go because they don't have a lot of practice with pushing that close to failure. So over time, you can build that skill and you can get better at gauging where your body is with that. So typically, it's usually somewhere between 5 to 7 exercises, depending on the exercises I use, because some exercises you can hit multiple things at once, right? Uh, so it's 5 to 7 exercises, usually 1 to 2 sets a pop. So, and that usually gets me in and out. And I do the same thing with my clients as well. And that usually gets us in and out of the gym in about an hour each time.
Yeah, that's usually my window, 45 minutes to an hour. I think that's a good time range. And then shifting gears a little bit, I wanted to dive into the wrestling. So what really led you there? And maybe was, you spoke about the nausea, like if you can dive into that a little bit more, like, how did you find, to really love that? And, maybe just open up the can on that, just like talk about wrestling. And yeah, I used to watch WWF back with The Rock, man. I used to make my dad
Yeah.
watch it, and he was like totally not into it. I was like, the most electrifying, and you know, uh, yeah, just let it rip on that. Like, where did you, find that, and your story with that, and where you're at now?
So, so wrestling's an interesting story for me because everyone around me that's also in wrestling grew up with wrestling. Like they knew about it when they were kids, and so they watched it, when they were 5, 6, 7 years old, and they just haven't stopped. And I don't have that experience with wrestling. I didn't even know it existed until high school, until I was about 14 or 15. Somebody in high school asked me if I watched it, and I was like, what are you even talking about? What is this wrestling? And so I watched it one night, and The Rock was on that episode, and I was hooked. And so and I was hooked, but I can't even say that I've been watching ever since because I haven't been. There have been time periods where I just wasn't watching at all. Um, and so around 14, 15, that was around 1999, 2000 when I got into it. 2008 or so, I was at a local wrestling show here in Albuquerque, and the show had ended, and I didn't have anything else to do for the rest of the day. So I started helping everybody tear the ring down, load it up on the truck, and so everybody could get out a little bit quicker. And I got to talking with one of the other wrestlers, and he asked if he could tell that I really liked wrestling. Obviously, I mean, I was at the show, so obviously I like wrestling. And so he asked if I had any desire to train to become a wrestler. And immediately the first word out of my mouth was absolutely. So I was like, all right, cool, let's do it. And so that next week I was in a ring and I was learning how to move in a ring. I was learning how to fall and was learning basic moves and basic movements, nothing crazy yet, no suplexes or swantons or anything like that. Those all came later. But I was also super thin. So the same height that I am now, I was still 6 feet, but I was 135 pounds versus me now, I'm about 50 pounds heavier than that. And so I was always hurt. I was always bruised. This is Mike, this is where our paths start to actually kind of connect a little bit because around the time I started wrestling was around the time I discovered Elliot Holson. I discovered strongman. And that's what finally got me to start building weight because I've been trying since high school. Um, but once I started playing around with strongman and powerlifting is when I started actually gaining weight. And so I started training in 2008. I had my debut in 2009, and I wrestled for the next few years until 2017 when I got diagnosed with bipolar. And part of the idea that I had when I was trying to figure it out and manage it was, okay, well if I know that I'm susceptible to being sent on this hypomanic tear by being around like exciting things is what I thought at the time, right? So I was like, all right, I'm gonna stop wrestling. I'm gonna stop everything. I just need to stop everything enough to where I can just get myself like back in the middle and back to just feeling good all the time, or at least most of the time. And so I stopped wrestling in 2017, in 2018, and I didn't pick up wrestling. So I was completely disconnected from it. So I didn't watch it. I didn't go anywhere near a wrestling ring. I didn't talk to anybody that was in wrestling that I knew. It was just like I just cut that just right out of my life. And then 2021 came by, and one of my friends here in Albuquerque that wrestles reached out to me because they were getting ready to start putting on shows again. And he asked what I was doing wrestling wise, and I told him like nothing. Like I told him that like I was done, and he didn't take that as the answer that for the question he wasn't asking yet. But he was like, "Yeah, well, some of us are getting ready to put on a show in a couple months, and we'd like you to be a part of it." And I was like, "I appreciate that." But I haven't been in a ring in 3 years, and I think right now, if I got in and just tried to do something, I'd probably hurt myself. I'd hurt somebody else. And he was like, "Yeah, yeah, I get that. I understand that. Why don't you come by the house? Why don't you come by the ring? Just get in the ring, get and start practicing, start training again." And I was like, "Listen." And so I was like, "All right, you know what? I'll go. I'll try. I'll probably be terrible, and I'll just say, you know what? It's not for me anymore. The chapter's over." So I did that. I went and I got back in the ring and I started right back at square one, just basic movements again. And I was like, "Ooh, this feels good now. This feels solid. Like I can still remember how to do this, and I can still go, as it were, right? I could still wrestle. I still had a decent amount of cardio." So I was like, "All right, let's try this show. Let's see how I feel." So I did. I tried the show, and it felt. This was the fall of 2021, and it felt better than any of the years before that. Just that one, it must have been just like a 5, 6 minute match or something. So not very long, but it felt great. And since then, I've been hooked on wrestling. So since then, I've been watching pretty consistently, and I've always been wrestling since 2021. I've been training. I've been traveling for wrestling. I've been watching. last year, 2024, was the best year for me for wrestling. I've had the most shows in a year. I've gone to the most new states, and so far I'm on pace to break those records this year too. And one of the most interesting things for me when it comes to wrestling is I don't like crowds. I don't like being around crowds of people. But for some reason, and the best thing that I can connect this to is in wrestling, I'm not in the crowd. The crowd is around me. So I'm separated from the crowd by the ropes, and I'm separated from the crowd by the guardrails on the floor. And I don't know that it's necessarily a selfish or like an egotistical type of separation, because I think, and maybe it is, if you think it is, let me know. But I would think that if it was, I would also still want to be in the crowd after the show. But I like going, and I like going to wrestling, having my match, absolutely killing it, and then going back behind the curtain and then just go sitting in a corner for the rest of the night. I don't want to go in the crowd after the show. I don't want to necessarily go like talk to fans for the sake of talking to fans. Like I will, like if anybody spots me, if as I'm out there, I'll absolutely have a conversation with anybody that asks. Like I'm not going to just kick anybody to the curb. But it's far down on my to do list on show days. Like go interact with the fans. I'm like I don't really want to. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I mean, I look at it. We have calls, and one of the things that we talk about is like introvert, extrovert, and lighthouse, and I dive into it. There's been times in my life where I've been very extroverted. I wanted that validation from other people, and as I got older, I went through a deep period of introversion, self reflection, and I just didn't want to be around people at all, like very much recluse. And as I'm at it now, one of the quotes that stood out to me from Christ is something that I try to dive deeper into, which is when he's speaking about giving to the poor, let not the left hand know what the right hand is doing. And I think that also applies with in this example, at least, let me know your thoughts on it. It's like to be in the arena, um, you're not you're so into what you're doing, the crowd, and even though you didn't say this, but the crowd could be there or a crowd cannot, because the second you're focused on the crowd, then it's like, how can I impress the crowd versus being so engulfed in what you're doing. In the same way, when you're giving to the poor, your cup is full, and it just giving. You're not doing it for you're self-aware that you're not doing it for any external, but the external is there. Obviously, it's
Mhm.
there. The crowd is part of it. I mean, that's something that I try to look at. Like when I do these podcasts, for example, it all comes in. It's like, am I saying the right thing? Or am I doing the right thing? It's like, that's the wrong MO. It's that I'm not listening to that thought. I'm just being honest. I'm speaking how I am. I don't care if people look at me a certain way, but I'm also strong in my convictions and not trying to think, do I want to say this for this reason? I want to just be present, right? I want to give to the poor because I'm just
Yeah,
giving. I'm not doing it so people see me. Oh, look at me! I gave to the poor, right? And in the same way, that's how I kind of look at it.
yeah,
I think that would be the best way of going about it. What are your thoughts?
yeah. I mean, I when I go out and when I wrestle, it's such a weird line to dance, because when we go out, when we wrestle, we our mission, at least my mission, is to make sure that the crowd has a good show, they have a good time, so that when they leave, they can say that they enjoyed the 2 or 3 hours that they experienced, that they spent with us. And so it's having that on one side, and on the other side going, but I'm also not doing this just for you. Like I'm not doing this move to impress you, but I also want you to have a good time.
Yeah.
So it's a weird sort of like, how do you accomplish? And most days I still can't figure out how to do both. I end up shifting between the two more often than not. But yeah, that's like the ongoing battle that I'm trying to solve with wrestling,
See,
is like, how
it's
do I
so
accomplish both of those goals?
it's so interesting. I look at the word bipolar, I reflect on it, just to kind of look at it from another lens. Like that's why I like Elliot's, bioenergetics. We all have energy and it's expressed, a certain way, like, and we put labels on it. And I'm not saying, don't identify. And if someone that bipolar isn't real, but like, I look at it from that lens of like, we all have this energy within us and bipolar, like if you break down that word bipolar, two poles. And I think one of the hardest things to do is like life is also polarity, right? Like on one level, there's, Elliot's talked about the tender aggressive man. We have an
Mhm.
element of ourselves that is kind and peaceful, but we also have another. It's like an animal. It's a brute. It's that strength, you know. Um,
Yeah.
and to reconcile those, there's so many things in our life that provide that opportunity to do so. And speaking for myself, I don't always do great. Sometimes I'm angry when I should be kind, or kind when I should be, and maybe not necessarily angry, but you get the gist of it, right? Like it's like
Yeah.
polar opposites, right? And then we're supposed to walk that middle path, that expresses them beautifully. And it's not easy to do that. And it requires, I think, some um, doing it the wrong way before getting to the right way.
Yeah. And now that you mention it, right? You talk about the two poles of things. I don't know. Maybe the answer is not finding the middle ground, right? Because if you look at other things that exist in polarity, you have day night, you have summer winter. There's middle grounds to those, right? There's spring, there's fall. Um, but you still have to go to one side and you still have to go to the other side. You have to spend time all the way across. And so maybe there's something there that could be copied over.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I that's where I just bump into so many paradoxes, right? Because if you try to walk the middle path, part of, I think, truly walking the middle path is by going in the extremes, experiencing the
Mhm.
extremes, and then they naturally push you without you trying to walk the middle path, right? It's like
Yeah.
you're able to express it the right way. Um, Coming up on like about an hour here. I wanted to close with just anything. I mean, my path has really just been deeply spiritual. And my younger self spirituality was very like sunshine and rainbows, and as I get older, it's much more. How can I meet that pain? How can I meet that pain like Christ met that pain with grace and all that? And if you could share anything that's really been on your heart, or anything that you've learned, on the path, and anything that's been your heart, a quote or any scripture, or, any experience that, would help other people find that clarity, you know, anything that comes to mind.
The one of the biggest things lately that has been helpful in staying more level-headed, beyond the exercise, beyond the diet, and all that helps for sure. One of the things that's helped the most is having a purpose, having something to live for outside of you. Um, and I think this is probably something that a lot of parents end up coming across when they had kids, right? Now they have someone else to live for. What I've noticed as I've been growing my coaching business is as I get more and more clients, now I feel like, oh, now I feel responsibility for them to help them get to their goals and to help them make sure uh, that I give them what they need. And as I've built that and as that's grown, I've found that I am more resilient to everything else. So it's a lot harder to get me to go either direction when we talk about bipolar, right? So it's not as it's way harder for me to find something that drags me into depression or to kick me into a hypomanic state because I have a focus on something that's not just me. And so, if I were to sum it up, I would say the biggest thing that's really helped me is having that external focus on something that doesn't serve me, which is, and even though it does serve me, right? Because I'm working with these clients and they're paying me, so there is that reciprocal exchange. But what I'm delivering is for them.
Yeah, I agree. Service to others and
Yeah.
responsibility. And that comes back to you. Um, close out, if you can just really share what services you provide, where people can find you, specifically what services you provide for anybody who's interested in diet or exercise, and where they can find you.
Yeah, so you can find me primarily on Instagram at Tony Davis Coaching. I do online fitness, online nutrition coaching, and basically everything that I talked about earlier with setting calories, setting protein, and building workouts. That's all. That's exactly what I do with my clients in the group. So if you were able to figure out those numbers, which I hope you were, because I think I came up with a pretty simple way for people to figure it out. Um, you can just take that, run with it. If you have questions about what foods to eat to hit those numbers, shoot me a message on Instagram. We can talk about it. If you want somebody to just build a workout for you based off of what I've said, you can hit me up on Instagram too. We can talk about that as much or as little as you want to.
Awesome, man. Well, I appreciate you for joining me, man. Thanks for being a man in the arena.
Of course, man. Thanks for having me again.